Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come to CMU again. We welcome you to our second presentation, which we'll discuss about our phase 2 and what progress we've made. So just quickly to go through the agenda, we'll talk about the new deliverables that we modified, and finally we'll go to Kate to discuss some of the survey results. Jackie and I will handle the call flow data analysis as well as recommended features. And then we'll open the floor up to some questions. So to quickly go through our deliverables, we removed PCC from the agenda just to narrow down our focus a little bit. So we'll discuss about, like I mentioned, the call flow analysis, the satisfaction surveys, the quality reporting for internal reporting purposes, and then our supporting recommendations for all of these. In phase 2, what we first did was establish metrics, how we were going to measure all of the work we were doing, whether it's the data or the patient satisfaction survey. And then finally, we created and sent out that survey and got a phenomenal response, which was thanks to Kate and Jackie. Actually, they took a lot of initiative on that. And finally, we looked at some of the unused features from the ShoreTel system and how we can kind of use that to after analyzing some of the data that we got from Rob. And we have to analyze.
It's one survey data and one is
Okay, moving on. So I'm going to hand it over to Kate to talk about the patient survey.
So, as you know, we did a parent and patient phone survey. We really spent the first month in phase 1 thinking about what it was that we wanted to really get from the survey. What were the features that we cared about? What did we care about? How the patients thought about things, or the parents. We want to know how they engage with the phone system, how they perceive it. A lot of different things in ways that they think that we might be able to improve it, or things that they really like about it. So we wanted to be really thoughtful about the questions, so we engaged with your staff, which was extremely helpful, and we worked together. We also enlisted the help of Michael Bridges, who is an expert here at Hines in survey research methodology, and he helped us develop our survey, and as Ashon mentioned earlier, we really did have a phenomenal response. We created it on SurveyMonkey, and we launched it on October 13th. As of the 23rd, this Sunday, which I think is today, we have 301 responses. 250 of those responses were in the first 24 hours, which is unbelievable. It is really, and actually thanks to Chad, especially for getting it up on the social media pages, for featuring it front row and center on your website. When you first go to your website, this is what you see. It really is a testament to your parents and the way that they engage, and that they really were willing to give us honest feedback. So I'm excited to take you through the survey results. And just so you are aware, we're not going to be providing really any of the recommendations in this. We're just solely reporting on how they responded. But Jackie and Ashon will get in later how we're using this data to really shape the way that we're moving forward. So we're using the way that they perceive it, and also mathematical, scientific ways of matching the two things. So the way we broke it down, the survey, we went through demographics. We really wanted to get through the patient experience. We asked some questions about voicemails and new features. And then we got their suggestions and recommendations, and then I'm going to close it out, survey section, with just some of our major takeaways and what we might proceed with in terms of our recommendations. So first I'm going to show you the demographics of the respondents. 297 of the 301 were parents. We actually had 2 patients fill out the survey, a grandmother and an employee. As you can see, the respondents really, there was a big majority in the 31 to 40-year-old. So it's younger, middle-aged parents. They have the patient age range a lot, but we really had a lot of parents with parents were able to they were able to, obviously pick if they had multiple children, so these numbers aren't going to add up. But we had a lot of respondents in the 1 to 4-year-olds and 5 to 10. So a lot of younger people with younger patients. We didn't really have a lot of responses from people that had older children. And so, one other thing is 46% visit Pleasant Hills, and 40% visit the Squirrel Hill Greenfield. So this really does match up with our idea of really focusing on these 2 clinics. So that really showed that we were on the right track with that. And then the majority of respondents call 1 to 2 times per month. As we'll see later with the data, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're making 1 call. That I think that it is more that they're calling about 1 issue. Because we did have, and I'll show you later, some respondents reporting calling multiple times. So when that comes up later, you'll realize what I'm talking about. So patients really is the preferred method of contact. 227 people expressed that. As the numbers don't necessarily match up because this is a lot of times where people ended up, we had about 45 to 50 respondents drop off of the survey at this point. They became ineligible if they chose that they did not call KPP. So I think we had a few people that were interested in the $50 Giant Eagle gift card. So yes, it absolutely is the preferred. So other methods, some of these are methods that they currently use, would like to use. So some of these are kind of getting into the suggestions. Email came up a lot. A lot of patients want the option to be able to email. The idea of a live chat, and they weren't prompted on any of these. These are actual just solid responses from the patients, respondents themselves. So live chat was something, text, the patient portal came up a few times. Some parents indicated that they would like to use social media to ask questions. I don't know how that works with HIPAA, but it was something that it might be good to explore, and maybe we'll talk about these in the recommendations, how certain information can be conveyed over social media. So that was the phone experience. And so this is the breakdown of why people call. A lot of times, and more times than not, it was for a sick child or a question for the nurse. So I think as we get into the later responses, a lot of times what was happening, people are stressed when they're calling about a sick child. They're stressed about wait times. A lot of people are mostly calling for this. Fix that area a little bit. But then, so well visit appointments, flu shots, test results. But yeah, this is why people are calling. Call satisfaction. People are satisfied with their experience at KPP and the way that they call in. They really appreciate the personalized care of the practice. They're satisfied with the advice that's given. They do report having to call multiple times sometimes, and they do dislike long wait times. So, yeah, that's it. I feel like I need to think of more things to say. I'll just keep going.
Yeah.
I'll fix this part, I promise. So then we got into the idea of the perception of wait time. We really wanted to gauge how people perceive their wait time and if it's okay with them. So we asked the 2 questions of how often and how long do you have to wait? So the majority of respondents said occasionally or sometimes. We broke it up into, I know these words kind of look similar, but we indicated the percentages just to kind of give a gauge of, is it on the more side of never or is it closer to always? And so you can kind of see that it ranges in the middle. There's really not a lot of people that never wait. So the majority of people that are calling in feel like and indicate that they have a wait time, which is typical for nearly any practice. You would expect that, but and then we'll get it, which is typical for any practice. But then when you think about how long they're waiting, a lot of the patients said that they're waiting 2 to 4 minutes, which is not a long time. But then it's pretty evenly split on the other side of having shorter wait times or 5 or more minutes. I think that what you kind of get into when you're looking at the 5 or more minutes is we just had a lot of responses from people and comments saying the wait time is way too long. I'm waiting too long to get to voicemail. So one indicated that they didn't even have the option to get to voicemail. That's how long the wait time was for them. Because obviously we know that they will have the option, but they decided that they had to hang up. And so on that, we actually also asked them if they hung up and why. Why would you hang up? Most of the people said no, they don't. 156 said no, and 83 said yes. The people that said no said hanging up's just not an option. I only call if it's important, which makes sense if you're calling for a sick child. But the people that did hang up, they said that the wait times were too long, 15 minutes or more. Someone commented, people not answering, or they're waiting on their phone, their kid starts acting up. They would call on a holiday, or I think there was an instance too of people specifically mentioned when the phone lines were down. We had a few commenters talk about that. And one thing that came up 3 times, which is concerning when you're thinking about the phone system, is 3 people reported having dead air sound. So they were just actually, when they were calling in, they would get through and then they would hear dead air and then have to hang up. But majority of people said that if they did hang up, they'd call back. I mean, obviously they're not giving up on accessing care for their child. So moving along, that's how they perceive their wait time. We started asking some questions about the voicemail. We wanted to know how often do they leave voicemails. And some people just refuse to leave a voicemail. They think that they're not going to get a call back. And then other people's occasionally, obviously if they're calling into the nurses' lines. Some of the comments that we received, so we asked them if they had ever not received a call back. But the majority of patients, 75% of the respondents actually said that they always receive a call back. And then the 25% said they didn't. And in some instances, what they were saying was they didn't receive a call back, and so they called back multiple times. So I don't know if that's actually they didn't receive a call back, or the wait time was too long for them to indicate that they would have received a call back in that time. They could have received a call back, but then maybe decided to continue to call until they connected with somebody. When we ask them just to kind of gauge how they respond, they don't think that the time it takes to get to voicemail is that long. But throughout the survey, it really is kind of evenly split. There are some people that are really happy and some people that had a really bad experience. So we kind of, where some people are saying it's way too long, other people are saying it's not that long at all. But I'll get into some of the suggested recommendations later, how to kind of work on both sides. But like I said, they needed to report the call out multiple times. They reported long wait times. And we also asked them if they want the option of going straight to voicemail. I think that some people were a little confused in this section because, excuse me, I think some people were a little confused in this section that they didn't think that they would only have the option to go to voicemail instead of being provided when they call in, either you can wait or call to voicemail. So it was kind of 50-50 on that. Some people said, yes, they always want the option. They're busy. They want to get back to their day. But then a lot of times people also said they wanted the option to go to voicemail. Sorry, I just blinked a second.
Yeah.
And the others didn't because...
Yeah, I forget what I was going to say on that, but I can come back to it. I'll think about it in a second. I'll think about it. Okay. So they were, I'm trying to think of anything else. There were really positive reports of feeling like the nurses and doctors went above and beyond to call them back. People are really, really happy that they when they do get a call back, they feel like what is being said to them is valuable, and they appreciate the advice on whether to come in or not. But yes, okay. Well, if I think about it, I'll come back to it. Okay, so then we started asking about new features. So one thing that we really wanted to ask about was the preference between a live person and automated option. They have 2 quotes from patients on the side here. I think when you're asking parents about do they want to talk to a live person when they're have a sick child, obviously you want to talk to a live person. I think that they, instead of looking at of having the options when you first call in, that they, I'm sorry, can you pause it just for a second?
It's either and or.
Okay, so picking back up where we were. So I think that what they were confused about was that it was either live person or automated options. But when people actually started getting into their comments, they said, I want a live person, but when I call, I want to be able to talk to the nurse right away. So I think that that kind of gets into the reason for having automated options of a lot of the patients said, I've been going here for years. I know that my child is sick and I need to talk to the nurse first to make an appointment. So instead of going through the front desk just to get to the nurse, I know that I need to talk to the nurse. I'd like the option of doing that, but then I want a live person. So yeah, they're very happy with the care. They like that they're talking to live people. They like what people are saying back to them. So yeah, that's that new feature. We also asked about the place in line feature, and it was very appealing to them. They like to be able to go about their day or tend to a sick kid, but they do worry about, and a lot of them report this happening with the current system, is they'll call in and leave a voicemail and be waiting for the call back, and then they're at work or they just miss it, and then they have to call back and they just feel like they're back into this loop. So one thing that they also said was that they want to know where they are in line, because sometimes they would like the option of, if they have a 2-minute wait, they might just hang on the phone, but if it's going to be 15 minutes or more, they could choose that option. And then another thing that came up was that they always want the option to be able to hold. They were just kind of worried that they might be forced into that option, and sometimes when you have a really sick kid, they reported that they're willing to wait as long as possible. And so then we just asked them, what are some suggestions and additional comments that you may have? A lot of people reported wanting to reach the nurse immediately. They wanted an estimate of what time, how long it would be to call. One thing that came up, and I think Jackie might talk about this later, is they want a callback number, so that if they do miss the call, that they can kind of either talk to the person they were talking to or let them jump back in line, so that they're able to speak to somebody when they do call back. Email or text came up a lot. This is outside of the scope of our project, but I thought it was worth noting, considering how many times it came up in the comments, was that they really wanted an online scheduling system. This is something, again, that I think is worth noting because it came up a lot. Not sure how it really works in practice, but they are frustrated with having to speak to the nurse's line before being able to schedule an appointment. A lot of times they really just want to bring their kid in, but you all obviously know a lot more about that than I do, but I just wanted to notify you of that. And one thing that we've talked about in a few of our different conversations, and it did come up in the survey a few times, that there was some dissatisfaction or specific instances of them not feeling treated well by the person that was answering the phone, or they felt like they weren't being heard. I'm happy to provide you with the comments that they left, but again, I just think that this is something that's worth noting. And so our big takeaways, most respondents are very satisfied with the Kids Plus Pediatrics, with the phone system, with your care, but they are divided on their experiences with the phone system, and they in their opinions about what should change. Some people say wait times are too long. Some say they're just fine. Other people want automated options. Other people absolutely do not. So yes, that's just how it kind of broke down. And they want shorter wait times, but they don't want to compromise care. So we're thinking about that in our recommendations. But they do want options. They want to leave messages, connect directly with a nurse, or schedule an appointment. And no matter what changes are implemented, the parents always want the option to wait on hold so that they can speak to a live person. And that is our survey data, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Sean to talk about something completely different.
All right, thank you, Kate, for the handoff. So now we're going to get a little bit more technical and heavy on the data end. It may look a little complicated, but it's really not, and we'll break it down for you so it's easy to understand. So you have up here right now is an example of one of the types of reports that we were using for our data. As you can see, there's a lot of information being collected, and how to parse through this is a bit challenging, especially when there's some glitches and bugs in the system which kind of skew the data. And we've accounted for a little bit of this, but as we go along, I'll elaborate. So again, like I said, it looks really complicated. It's really not. This is just an equation to explain how queues form. So for example, when people call into ShoreTel, then the more people that are calling, they're going to have wait times or waiting for a voicemail or whatever it may be. This is just an equation to explain how that happens. The reason I'm breaking this down is because we want to justify to you that how we're doing the data analysis is robust, and it's not just assumptions that we're making. We do have to make certain assumptions, and we've listed those out. And that way, when you guys are actually doing this, implementing this, for 5 years down the line, when the practice may have changed, you can modify those assumptions, take it out, replace it with real data. So, like I said, this is the equation of how queues form. There's two major components for it: is capacity utilization, which is how you're basically using your staff and the tool, ShoreTel system, and then the variability effect, which, of course, it's pretty self-explanatory. There's variation on how people call, how long it takes to process each call, and etc. So I'll break this down one by one and explain it. So first thing we talk about, or we'll address, is the capacity utilization. The major concept you want to get out of this is that the rate at which people are coming in to the system, meaning how many calls are coming in a given time frame, so per hour, and the rate at which these calls are being processed have to be somewhat, they have to correlate. So if you're getting too many calls coming in and it's taking a long time to process each call, and you're not able to meet with the demand, that tells you a little bit about what your capacity constraints are. And you can go forward with that and make assumptions, or even start addressing your staffing needs to this. So to break down the equation real quick, Ri here, so rho, which is that P looking symbol, is equal to Ri over Rp. It's nothing but the rate of inputs versus the rate of processing time. So how many people are calling in at a given time, and how many calls are being processed in that same given time, same units. And C just represents the number of triage members available, kind of like your capacity. So if you have 5 triage members working in a day, and you have 10 calls per hour, but you can process 12 calls per hour, you're pretty much doing fine, and you actually have some safety over there. It gets a little more technical, like safety capacity and buffers and stuff. We're not going to get into those details. However, that is a good background into how this equation comes out. So next thing I want to talk about is the variability effect. This is basically taking the variation in inter-arrival times, which is how many calls are you getting per hour, because you're not getting calls every 5 seconds. You're not having the phone ring. Sometimes it takes a minute, sometimes it's every 2 seconds, and it could be 3 minutes over the course of that hour. So that variability is important to understand, so that way you can make an estimate of what's happening within an hour, rather than just assume, over a 10-hour period this is what's happening. You do have peak hours and low-key hours, so it accounts for a little bit of that. And the CI was talking about the variability in arrival time. The CP refers to the processing time. So it's the coefficient of variation, which is, again, sigma over mu, which is standard deviation over your mean. All of this information is coming out from those ShoreTel reports. There's no reason to, think it's really complicated. We don't have this information. It's simple data that you can just extract through a basic equation on Excel. Once you have that information, though, moving on to CP, you can understand how you can adjust for a smaller queue length by decreasing the deviation in the call processing time. So, for example, if it takes, on average, all 5 triage nurses to handle a call, it takes them 2 minutes. Is there a way we can cut that down to 1.5 minutes? Or do they need more time maybe to make sure that the quality of information they're providing to the patients is good? From the survey, like we mentioned, they're actually pretty satisfied with the care they're getting. The type of output that the nurses are producing is very good in terms of patient satisfaction. And so there's obviously, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to kind of balance out the time versus the quality. So that's what CP addresses. So overall, if I quickly just go back to the equation, you have this will take care of how long it takes for your calls and the quality of those calls, and this component takes care of how many people you need to staff at given hours, and maybe it's not, you don't even need to, maybe you're overstaffed or understaffed, and actually Jackie's going to get into a little bit on that in just a bit, right after I give you a quick example. So this is an example of some of the data that we've been manipulating. We're not going to use this for our final. This is daily data, as you can see, it's taken out by days. Rob has actually provided us the hourly data, and it's way more specific. It'll get us more accurate numbers. So like I was mentioning earlier, we're talking about standard deviation and in the number of calls you'll get per day, as well as the amount of time it takes to process these calls. So all of this looks complicated. It's not. They're very simple formulas. You can Google. I didn't even know these. I just kind of used so I do want to give credit to my business process modeling professor, Karen Moore. She's been critical in making sure that whatever we're doing is we're not making assumptions that are really giving you falsified data. It's somewhat robust, and it's coming from a reliable source. So looking at this, for example, standard deviation in number of calls. Let's take Wednesday, for example. You had 150 calls that day. So all this is saying is that those calls on a given Wednesday can fluctuate to 175 or to 125. So that's the deviation of 25 from that mean, which is 150. And then the processing times, that's the exact same thing, standard deviation. So on that Wednesday, it took, on average, 1.51 minutes for the nurses to process each call. Well, that processing time isn't exactly 1.51 minutes for every nurse for every call. It deviates a little. Some nurses might take a little bit more time, some a little bit less, and it depends on the complication of the call, right? If you have a simple prescription refill versus, a new patient that you're trying to get into the system. So we're going to give you something like this with a little bit, it'll look a lot cleaner. It'll be a little bit more, you'll have more information that you can actually take actions on. So just to give you an example of what some of our data is looking like and where it's headed. So I'm going to hand it over to Jackie, which this kind of leads on into some of her work, and hopefully it'll tie things up well at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishan. So now I'm going to go into a deeper dive on the data that he has presented here. From what we can tell from the data that we got, we had about 56% of all calls handled, which leaves 44% going to voicemail. Now that is alarming because almost half of all of the calls are just going to voicemail instead of being handled. So what we wanted to do was see why this is happening. Is it because of scheduling or staffing, or what is really going on here? From the data we collected before, we saw that Monday actually had the highest number of average of calls, which is 208 calls total across all 3 locations. So to break down our logic of seeing where the problem is, we looked at the Squirrel Hill location triage staff. From their staffing, we saw that 5 members are on staff from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. and 4 members from 1 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. So let's bring all the data together. With an average call time of 2 minutes for Mondays, which is, by the way, the highest average call time across all days of the week, we add in the 3 minutes of documentation that each triage member has. That leaves 5 minutes per call. So if we assumed, this is wrong by the way, if we assume that each staff member answered 12 calls per hour, the capacity with basic logic should be around 468 calls per workday. And that should be able to be handled by just the Squirrel Hill triage staff alone. So what is the problem here, and why are all the calls not being answered? We concluded that staffing is not the issue. Rather, there's an influx of calls at a certain time that is overwhelming the staff. Because we didn't have the hourly data until this past weekend, we made a mock-up of what we thought was happening during the call volume. So here we see a big spike at 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., about 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and we're assuming that on a Monday morning, the first weekday of the week, people are calling and overwhelming all the triage staff across all 3 locations. So in this hypothetical graph, what we saw was the problem with the demand, not the staffing. So staffing to this excess demand is the problem, and how we can solve it is by smoothing the demand. Now, how can we adjust the demand now that we know the problem is that and not scheduling of staff? One thing we discussed was leveraging the phone system, social media, or website to notify patients of peak call times. So what they can do is they'll call and there will be a message saying, you're going to have to wait a long time at this time because of the high call volume, so please visit the patient portal or reach us by a different method. Another way is to adjust the lockout system time for documentation. One issue that we saw after talking to triage was that the 3-minute lockout time for documentation was not working for them. Either they have too much time for documentation for a simple case, or they did not have enough time and other incoming calls are coming and disrupting what documentation they were doing. So what we would like is to have a more flexible way to go about documenting and adjusting the time needed for each special case. And lastly, we would like to implement automated options at the beginning of the call, and that could include saying, it's going to take an hour, please call back after 10 a.m. or go straight to voicemail. And I'll be discussing more on what features we would like to recommend coming up. So here I just want to note that the data we have shown has bugs, or the data is not necessarily perfect, and that is because the phone system is buggy. So if someone answered a call, the phone may still be ringing, or the 3-minute data documentation time wasn't necessarily 3 minutes, and somehow the system got overridden. And that is why we would like to present a quality reporting form for the triage staff. This way, they can tell Rob or anyone else who's responsible what is happening and when, and how you can fix your phone system so that the actual bugs are not happening and we can have better data to work with for future analysis. So for the next steps of the call data that we have, one, we would like to analyze the hourly call data that we just got last week. And 2, we can identify trends in call volume from these hourly data. And lastly, we will give more specific recommendations when we have more than just a hypothetical graph. So now I'll be talking about some features that we are recommending, and we're breaking down our features into short-term implementation and long-term implementation that requires ECC integration. So first, to start off with short-term implementation, you can implement these features now with whatever system you have. You do not need any additional help from ShoreTel. And the first one we would like to discuss is the immediate access to voicemail upon call-in. So the current call flow right now, it requires all parents to wait for 5 minutes before they even have the option to go to voicemail. So for cases that are not very urgent, it would be nice to have this option in the very beginning to say, press 1 to go to automated message, or press 2 to speak with a nurse or front desk. Second is a callback / save your place in line feature. And in this case, the parent calling in can enter the queue without having to keep holding on to the phone. And once it's their turn in the queue, they will receive a call back. And that's easily implemented with your current settings. Thirdly, we like a priority-based routing. So with priority-based call routing, if a nurse picks up the phone in the front desk and someone has a very urgent problem, the nurses can override the queue to set the more urgent cases above the non-urgent cases. And that is only if you don't implement a feature where they can go, where they do not have to speak with a person in the first place. And lastly, it's the notification of the queue position. So what we found from the surveys was that people want to know where they are in line, and whether that is on hold or if it's in the save your place in line feature. And this way, they'll know, they can gauge how long it might take and what their next step should be, or they won't call back 5 different times thinking that they're not in line anymore. Now here are some recommendations that we came up with, but this is long-term because it requires ECC integration and you're working with ShoreTel to make these happen. The first is a text message appointment reminder, and this is in line with what Kate has presented. Many of the patients and parents have indicated that they would like a text message appointment reminder. And this way you won't have to staff someone to call everyone every night too. Second is intelligence gathering. So with intelligence gathering, what we meant is integrating the PCC system and the ShoreTel system. So when someone calls in, the nurses at the front desk can write down their name or patient ID or something, and a chart will just pull up when triage answers the phone. So that will integrate well into triage and facilitate how long each call will take. And triage members that way won't have to pull up the chart, read the chart, and understand what is going on, and it will be very easy for them to use. Along with intelligence gathering, we wanted to use this when the system is not fully debugged, so we can know exactly where things are going wrong. And lastly, we would like an internal messaging system, and that is for the staff members to communicate with each other better, and that requires the ECC integration. So lastly, we would just like to go over phase 3, or what's coming up. We're going to continue with our survey and report analysis. And secondly, we will determine the capacity and utilization of ShoreTel system that Ishan has presented now that we have hourly data. Complete hourly data analysis for the smoothing of the demand, and develop additional recommendations for you. Any questions?